Hey, I want to add to this right here because I think Vince does a good job in setting this up. Can you please like and save this video for later because it's going to be a long one? Let's talk about accountability. Accountability is driving the right behaviors so employees can own the process to meet the overall objective of the organization. Now, in my experience, right, whenever I teach accountability and ownership in groups of people, managers, leaders, executives, people that I've worked with, organizations I've worked with, accountability is accountability. Accountability is the behaviors that you're driving to meet the overall objectives. Now, in many organizations, accountability is not a good word, right? They don't like that because accountability is holding people accountable to the expectations that you provide in order to meet the objectives, right? And it can be a good experience or a bad experience depending on how you approach it, right? But in this particular case, I think what you're talking about is your approach, depending on the situation that you have. But here's where I caution you on what you're asking. You've got to do the work up front, though. In order for you to have the right conversation, which is kind of a neutral conversation, you've got to do all the work up front. What I mean is that if you're a proactive manager, you've got to do the work up front to give you leverage in order for you, whenever you have this conversation, your employee has to leave that meeting saying, okay, my boss, James 2020, he or she is trying to help me, and I've got to own this process. It's on me now. The employee has to leave feeling like that. So how do you do that? You've got to do the work up front. You've got to understand the activity list with reasonable expectations. You've got to understand what the barriers are. You've got to understand what the training needs and capacities are. You've got to understand goals, KPIs, and metrics. You've got to understand how to plan correctly to meet those employee needs, right, in order to meet the objectives. You've got to follow up effectively and consistently in order for you to understand what's holding employees back based on performance and how they're doing, and just engaging with employees about the work that they're doing, both positively, right, and course correcting those that are not. That's all part of the process. Now, if you do that correctly, right, whenever you have this conversation, it's kind of a neutral conversation, and it depends how you want to spin this, right? And sometimes it is a kind of a reinforced item to say, hey, we talked about this. What's different? What is holding you back? But the key thing to this conversation is a couple key things I want to make sure that everyone is aware whenever you have these conversations. Number one, and the most important thing, is that employees should not be surprised. If they are surprised about this conversation, shame on you. Number two is that if you did all the work up front, it's about saying, hey, this is the data. This is everything that we talked about. And number three, you've got to ask close-ended questions so they can say yes or no. Remember, you're trying to build a box or framework around the conversation that you're having so that they understand the steps they need to take in order to be successful. You're trying to set them up to be successful, but they've got to take the action in order to do that. Meaning that I understand my roles and responsibility. I understand my KPIs, goals, and expectations. I understand where my gaps are at. All right. And I agree with my boss and what he or she is doing, and these are the steps necessary to be successful. If you do that correctly in this conversation, then accountability is not negative or positive. It's just neutral in its accountability. Now, how you approach it could be saying, hey, I want to help you, but I can only do so much. I want you to be successful as an employee, and this is the things that we're doing in order to do that, right? So yes or no questions and that, and then let them answer. If you're a person, a nervous person that likes to fill in the gaps and dead silence, you've got to, in order for them to answer, to say yes or no and explain a little bit, then you counter that with what the data says and what you're trying to achieve. Then at the end of all this, right, the last thing is that there has to be actions that the employee commits to. Remember, all these meetings that you're having with the employees, there must be a commitment from the employee to say, I'm going to do this by this time. If you don't have that when you leave, then why have the meeting to begin with, right? There's no sense in the meeting at all if you're not having a commitment by the employee on what you're doing in order to help them be successful. And the last thing, follow up. When can I follow up with you on this? If they say 6 months or it's 2 months, 3 months, you're like, no, this has to be a little bit quicker than that. 2 weeks? Can we follow up in 2 weeks? Or the next time I follow up you in the field, we can talk about it when I do my follow up tomorrow or the next day. Is that okay? I'm not expecting you to have all the answers tomorrow, but at least I can see that you're on the right track so I can guide you. But realistically, we can say, what do you think? If the employee gives you a reasonable time frame on what that looks like to fix that, you're like, okay, great. Let me write it down. I'll follow up with you then. If you have any questions, let me know, but then we can fix that. Then we'll follow up again in another conversation in about 2 weeks. I'll send you the invite. That is how you do that. Now, if you like this kind of content, please like, follow, and share this video.